Welcome to this explainer for the Social Fabric Unraveled, created and produced by Adam Crenshaw, where we pull at the very threads of everyday life to figure out the deeper structures of our society. I am so thrilled to be your host today as we dive straight into the fascinating and honestly constantly shifting definition of the family unit.
Think of this bite-sized explainer as your visual guide to accompany Adam's incredible audio journey. Whether you're a student, a sociology nerd, or just kind of curious about how our world is stitched together, we're using this time to break down some pretty complex sociological texts into engaging, easy-to-digest concepts.
So, here's how we're going to unravel things today. First up, the traditional family myth. Second, the history of the household. Third, the sociological debate. And finally, we'll wrap up with the core threads of family.
Section 1. The traditional family myth. Let's confront that image that instantly pops into our heads when we hear the word family.
For decades, pop culture icons like Happy Days and the Brady Bunch have completely hijacked our understanding of kinship. You know, Dr. Elise Newman actually points out that these media portrayals established a very white-centric, middle-class ideal of the perfect nuclear family. We're talking the classic breadwinner father, homemaker mother, and their biological kids. It basically became this massive nostalgia trap, a literal gold standard that society quietly pressured all of us to measure up against.
And it hasn't really stopped. Even modern sitcoms echo this exact structure. I mean, think about The Simpsons. Despite all their hilarious dysfunction, they still fit this exact mold perfectly. But sociologists like Diana Gittins argue that this media-driven ideology of the traditional family is honestly more of a socially constructed myth than an actual biological fact. It totally ignores the beautifully diverse ways people actually live and support each other out there in the real world.
Section 2. History of the household. Because if TV is just a nostalgic trap, we need to see how families actually function in the past.
Historian Stephanie Kuntz's research shows us that families have always been incredibly fragile and ever-changing. Take the ancient Mediterranean world, for example. Households were so huge and disparate that one unit could include kin, servants, and slaves all living under a single head of household. Fast forward to the 19th century, and boom, industrialization causes a massive shift permanently separating home life from wage labor. Work moved into factories, and family dynamics changed forever. And then we hit the 1950s post-World War II era.
Now this is the really wild part. That 1950s family we idolized, it wasn't a return to a timeless norm at all. It was practically an invention. Kuntz notes that this brief anomaly was heavily subsidized by the GI Bill, government loans, and massive housing investments. Plus, that pristine image masked a much darker reality. 30% of American kids were living in poverty, and there was widespread discrimination against minorities and women. It was a completely unique economic moment, definitely not a biological standard.
Section 3. The sociological debate. So if families aren't strictly biological and haven't always looked like a 1950s sitcom, how do sociologists actually define them?
Well, before we get to the specific theories, we have to understand that the family is considered a primary social institution. What does that mean? It's basically a mechanism or pattern within a society focused on maintaining order and meeting basic human needs. The family is the foundational building block meant to keep society chugging along. But exactly how it does that? That is where sociologists fiercely disagree.
And that brings us to the great sociological showdown. Structural functionalism going head-to-head against social constructionism. These are the two major lenses we use to try and make sense of kinship.
First up is structural functionalism, which was super popular back in the 1950s. A great example of this is Talcott Parsons' role theory. This perspective relies heavily on heteronormative definitions, arguing that families operate kind of like organs in a body, each with a very specific, rigid function. It claims that specific gendered roles are absolutely indispensable for social unity. So men serve as the instrumental, providers dealing with the outside world, while women are the expressive, emotional supporters inside the home. The main goal? Procreation and socializing kids to follow cultural rules.
On the flip side, we have social constructionism. This camp argues that family is totally fluid and deeply shaped by cultural and social forces. It isn't defined strictly by biology or bloodlines, but rather by geography, capital, and social agreements. This is where we get to see really beautiful variations emerge, like the concept of the chosen family. This is where friends or community members form deep, reliable familial bonds that are every bit as real and valid as biological ones.
Section 4. The core threads of family. With all these shifting definitions and competing theories, what are the actual common threads that universally weave a family together?
According to sociologists like Ferguson and Dr. Neumann, it really boils down to three foundational components. If a group has these three specific things, sociologically speaking, you have a family.
First, the unit absolutely must support its members. Now, this support takes a ton of different forms. It means showing up for one another physically, offering emotional care during those really tough times, or pooling resources for financial stability. And the best part about this requirement? You absolutely do not need to share a single drop of DNA to support someone in this way.
Second, it has to bind the individual to a primary social group. Think of your family as a bridge. It plugs you into larger community networks. Through the people who raise you, whether that's biological parents, grandparents, or a chosen family, you get connected to religious affiliations, political communities, and broader social circles. They anchor you in the wider world. Finally, merging just a bit of that functionalist thought we talked about earlier, the family must socialize its members. This basically means teaching individuals the rules of the game, how to understand, participate in, and maintain the cultural norms of their society. It's all about passing down the knowledge of how to just function in the world around you.
And I think this perfectly illustrates our ultimate takeaway from Diana Gittins. Kinship isn't some rigid, unchangeable biological fact. It's a method of demarcating obligations and responsibility. It's all about who you choose to care for, who you are responsible to, and the bonds you actively, intentionally build and maintain.
So as you prepare to jump back into Adam Crenshaw's audio deep dive in the Social Fabric Unraveled, I want to leave you with this to chew on. Based on these three threads, support, social binding, and socialization, how is your own family stitched together? Who really makes up your true social fabric? Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and enjoy the rest of your sociological learning journey.